You did not begin as a person with preferences. You began as a field that could not be offended because nothing was separate enough to be threatened. In that first state, there was no lesson because there was no angle from which to learn. There was only fullness without a witness. And the strangest truth is that fullness can be complete and still be unfinished. Polarity was not born as a fight. It was born as a mercy. It was the first way infinity allowed itself to be experienced without breaking into pieces. Not fragmentation, not exile, not falling, but a controlled difference that could be held without collapse. Polarity was the first gentle incision in sameness, the first permission for contrast without separation. You can imagine an ocean with no wind. It is still an ocean, and it lacks nothing, yet it has no surface language. The moment wind arrives, the ocean does not become more ocean, it becomes readable. Waves are not additions, they are visibility. Polarity is like that. Not a new substance, but a new readability of what was already there. A mind will try to make this into a timeline, as if there was a moment and then an event and then a result. But polarity is not a thing that happened once. It is a condition that infinity can adopt, withdraw, and readopt without losing itself. It is a mode, a lens, a posture of the infinite field that makes experience possible. If you have been trained to think of polarity as good versus evil, you will miss the origin. Morality arrives later, once identity can cling and defend and accuse. In the beginning, polarity was not a judgment. It was simply the first distinction between two directions of the same movement: expansion and contraction, outward and inward, radiance and absorption, offering and receiving. The first polarity was not light and dark. That pairing is already too visual, too human, too late. The first polarity was presence and absence, but even those words can deceive you. Because absence was not a void. Absence was the space that lets presence be recognized. Absence was the quiet that allows tone to be heard. Without absence, presence is only unbroken saturation, and saturation has no edges for awareness to touch. A skeptic will say, if infinity is infinite, it does not need contrast. That sounds reasonable until you notice that need is not the point. The point is expression. Infinity does not create because it lacks. It creates because it can. Polarity is not evidence of deficiency, it is evidence of capability. It is the first proof that the infinite field can generate experience without reducing itself. Polarity is also the first teacher of direction. In pure unity, there is nowhere to go because everywhere is the same. The moment polarity appears, direction appears with it, and with direction comes the earliest form of desire. Not desire as craving, but desire as orientation, a leaning, a preference in motion. A subtle yes that differentiates from a subtle no. This is why polarity cannot be eliminated by enlightenment, only integrated by maturity. When you try to destroy polarity, you do not return to source, you return to numbness. When you pretend polarity does not exist, you do not become free, you become unconscious. True freedom is the ability to hold both poles without being owned by either, and that ability takes time inside form. Look at your own nervous system. It speaks polarity before you speak language. Tension and release. Guard and open, freeze and flow. This is not a flaw, it is an echo of the first cosmic distinction. Your body is a living instrument designed to register contrast, so that awareness can become precise. Every time you feel pulled in two directions, you are not failing, you are meeting the original architecture of experience. But here is where polarity becomes dangerous. The moment identity forms, it tries to recruit a pole as proof of itself. It says, I am the light, therefore the dark must be my enemy. Or it says, I am the strong, therefore weakness must be rejected. Polarity becomes warfare when a being confuses orientation with superiority. The poles were never meant to be ranks. They were meant to be complements that create depth. A second objection rises here, quiet and sharp. If polarity is natural, does that excuse harm? Does it justify cruelty, domination, predation, deceit? No, harm is not a pole. Harm is what happens when a being uses polarity to avoid responsibility. Polarity creates contrast, but responsibility chooses how to move within it. You can feel anger without becoming violence. You can feel fear without becoming control. You can feel hunger without becoming exploitation. The earliest oversouls, before identity hardened into story, used polarity as navigation. They did not ask, which side is correct? They asked, which direction is coherent with my tone? Polarity gave them a compass, not a courtroom. They learned themselves by touching one pole, then the other, and noticing which contact produced resonance rather than distortion. Identity, in its cleanest form, is simply the memory of what harmonizes. Your solitude and your longing, your discipline and your rebellion. These are not evidence that you are broken. They are evidence that you are polarized, which means you are alive in a field designed for growth. The problem is not that you contain opposites. The problem is that you were taught to hate one side of your own range. Polarity also explains why spiritual language becomes slippery. People say unity as if it means sameness. But unity is not sameness. Unity is coherence across difference. It is the ability for opposites to belong to the same truth without needing to cancel each other. The highest unity does not erase contrast. It holds contrast without collapse. And yes, there is a reason the world feels like it is splitting. When collective systems lose coherence, polarity intensifies. The poles become louder because subtlety is no longer trusted. People move to extremes because extremes feel certain, and certainty feels like safety when reality feels unstable. But this is the trap. Polarity can guide you, yet it can also seduce you into simplification. You see it in politics, in relationships, in spirituality, in identity movements, in religion, in every place where the mind is anxious and the heart is raw. The mind wants a clean enemy so it can feel clean itself. The mind wants a clean label so it can stop trembling. But the soul was never built to live inside a slogan. The soul was built to hold tension long enough for a third truth to emerge. A third objection appears, almost compassionate. If polarity creates depth, why does it hurt so much? Why do opposites inside the same person feel like tearing? Because the poles are not the pain. The pain is the resistance to containing them. Pain is the friction between a truth you carry and a rule you were given. Pain is what happens when you are designed for integration but trained for rejection. This is why the earliest polarity teachings are not abstract. They are intimate. They show up as shame, because shame is the attempt to exile a pole. They show up as addiction, because addiction is the attempt to stay on one pole permanently. They show up as spiritual bypassing, because bypassing is the attempt to float above the poles to avoid the work. They show up as chronic conflict, because conflict is the attempt to force the outside world to mirror your internal split. Polarity tones, at their purest, do something that feels almost unbearable at first. They remove your right to be simple. They remove your right to be only a victim or only a hero. They remove your right to be only gentle or only fierce. They confront you with the possibility that your highest function might require access to both ends of your own spectrum, and that your growth depends on learning when to use which. Do not mistake this for a call to become balanced in a shallow way. Balance is not 50-50. Balance is responsiveness. Sometimes the coherent move is strong boundaries and decisive no. Sometimes the coherent move is open hands and forgiving yes. The mature being is not the one who stays centered by avoiding extremes. The mature being is the one who can travel to an extreme without losing awareness, then return without denial. This is the part people avoid because it threatens the identity they built to survive. If you are praised for being the good one, you will fear your darkness. If you are praised for being the strong one, you will fear your softness. If you were harmed in chaos, you will worship control. If you were suffocated by control, you will worship chaos. Polarity reveals that your coping strategy is often just a loyalty to one pole, chosen under pressure, repeated until it looks like personality. In the pre-universe layer, polarity is the first permission for depth. In the human layer, polarity is the first invitation to stop lying about your range. And in the spiritual layer, polarity is the first refusal to let you call avoidance peace. If your peace depends on not feeling one side of your own truth, it is not peace. It is sedation dressed in sacred language. So if you have been waiting for a teaching that tells you which side you should pick, you will be disappointed. That is not what this is. The polarity tones do not crown a winner. They teach discernment without hatred. They teach that the pole you reject will rule you from the shadows, and the pole you worship will eventually become a prison. Polarity was the first way infinity made itself legible, but legibility comes with consequence. Once contrast exists, misinterpretation becomes possible. Once direction exists, manipulation becomes possible. Once preference exists, attachment becomes possible. The question is not whether polarity is good or bad. The question is whether you will learn to use it as a compass, or whether you will use it as a weapon. And if you listen carefully, you can feel the next pressure building already. Because polarity alone does not explain movement. It only explains difference. Difference must still learn how to flow without tearing itself apart. Contrast must still learn how to become rhythm. The moment you accept that unity can hold opposites, you are forced to ask what makes them dance instead of collide, and that question does not let you stay comfortable for long. Polarity is not two sides of one coin. That image makes it feel neat, owned, finished. Polarity is a living pressure system, and the moment you treat it like a concept you can hold, it begins holding you. The first trap is believing polarity exists to be resolved. The deeper truth is that polarity exists to keep awareness moving, because static awareness becomes certainty, and certainty becomes sleep. If you left with the idea that the goal is to hold both poles, you might think the work is mostly tolerance. You might think maturity means staying calm while life swings. But polarity does not ask for tolerance, it asks for selection, and selection always costs something. Every real choice creates an absence somewhere else. The second trap is believing that integration means you never prefer. Polarity is the earliest architecture of consequence. Before morality, before story, before identity words, consequence arrives as direction. When you lean toward one pole, you do not just feel a mood, you open a door. A door opens into experiences that can only happen there, and that is the point. Polarity is not a test you pass. Polarity is how the infinite field gives itself rooms. Most people secretly want polarity to be a ladder. They want one pole to be higher so they can climb out of their confusion. They call one pole love and the other fear, then pretend the problem is solved. They call one pole light and the other dark, then build a religion from avoidance. That is not integration. That is ambition wearing sacred language, and it always produces shame, because the pole you reject does not disappear. It becomes the part of you that acts without permission. It becomes the tone that leaks into your decisions when you are tired, lonely, or threatened. The pole you worship does not purify you. It creates a persona, and the persona becomes a cage that demands constant maintenance. So polarity is not two clean teams. Polarity is two functions of the same life force. One function protects form. One function dissolves form. One function consolidates identity. One function disrupts identity. If you label the protector as good and the dissolver as bad, you will become rigid and call it grounded. If you label the dissolver as good and the protector as bad, you will become unstable and call it freedom. Both errors come from the same hunger, the hunger to stop feeling tension. But tension is not a symptom of failure. Tension is the engine that keeps becoming honest. When tension disappears too early, you do not become enlightened, you become edited. This is why polarity intensifies during awakening. Awakening is not a smooth ascent. Awakening is a confrontation with everything you filtered out to survive. When awareness expands, it illuminates the full spectrum, and the spectrum immediately demands responsibility. People call this dark night, but it is more precise to call it unedited reality. Here is the destabilization that matters. You cannot integrate polarity by staying in the middle. The middle is not a home, it is a pause. The middle is where you catch your breath before you commit. If you build a life around never committing, you will call it balance, but it will be fear. Life requires biased action. Every day you choose what you feed and what you starve. Every day you choose which pole gets to drive your voice, your money, your boundaries, your attention. Polarity is not a meditation exercise. Polarity is the cost of being a creator inside time. This is why people who preach nonstop neutrality often damage others. Neutrality can be wisdom when it is temporary and conscious. Neutrality becomes cruelty when it is used to avoid contact with consequence. A person can hide behind non-judgment while letting harm continue, and then call themselves spiritual. So the real question is not how to hold both poles. The real question is how to wield them without lying. When does protection become control? When does dissolution become sabotage? When does softness become self-abandonment? When does hardness become self-worship? Your nervous system already knows the answer in fragments. There are moments when you set a boundary and your body relaxes, even if your mind feels guilty. There are moments when you forgive and your body warms, even if your mind feels foolish. There are moments when you push forward and your body steadies, and moments when you push forward and your body tightens like a warning. That warning is not weakness. It is resonance intelligence. Polarity tones operate like a tuning fork, not a courtroom. They do not tell you what you should be. They show you what your system can carry without distortion, and they show you where you pretend you can carry something, while your life proves you cannot. But even that clarity can become a new trap, because once you learn polarity as navigation, you might start optimizing your life to avoid uncomfortable poles. You might start calling certain emotions low frequency and refusing to feel them. You might start calling certain desires ego and refusing to admit them. This is how spiritual people become emotionally illiterate while sounding wise. Polarity was never meant to remove raw experience. It was meant to structure raw experience into depth. Depth requires friction. Depth requires the sensation of being pulled. When you remove friction, you remove the possibility of real choice, and then growth becomes a performance. So you must learn a harder truth. Some poles are not meant to be integrated into harmony. Some poles exist to be separated by boundary. Not everything belongs inside your life. Not every tone is yours to carry. Integration is not universal inclusion. There are energies that ask for partnership and energies that ask for refusal. There are people you can love without letting them enter you. There are truths you can honor without building your identity around them. Polarity becomes wisdom when you can distinguish between openness that heals and openness that erases you. This is where the second destabilization arrives. The pole you fear might be the pole you need, and the pole you admire might be the pole that is ruining you. Many people admire light because it looks clean, but their version of light is denial. Many people fear darkness because it looks dangerous, but their version of darkness is simply honesty without decoration. Sometimes the work is not to soften. Sometimes the work is to harden. Sometimes the work is not to surrender. Sometimes the work is to stand. If you cannot allow that, you are not integrated. You are conditioned. Polarity tones also reveal something about identity that most teachings avoid. Identity does not form from a single preference. Identity forms from repeated selections under pressure. You become you by what you choose when there is cost. You become you by what you refuse to do even when it would benefit you. This is why the world feels so loud right now. The collective is under pressure, and pressure forces selection. People are revealing what they value, not by their words but by their consistent choices. In that revelation, many masks die, and the death of masks feels like chaos to those who depended on them. Polarity is also the earliest form of time. Not clocks, not calendars, but sequence. When you choose one pole, you create a before and after in your own field. You create memory, you create anticipation, you create pattern. This is why polarity is inseparable from karma, not as punishment, but as momentum. If you want to understand your repeating loops, look for the pole you keep choosing to avoid cost. Some people choose the peace pole to avoid conflict, and then they live in silent resentment. Some people choose the conflict pole to avoid vulnerability, and then they live in endless war. Some people choose the savior pole to avoid their own pain, and then they burn out and become bitter. The polarity tones do not shame you for this. They expose the mechanism. They show you that your so-called personality might be a strategy that once kept you safe. Then they ask whether you are ready to update it. That question is where real power begins, and it is also where excuses die. Now the three vectors tighten around the same core. Cosmically, polarity is the first condition that makes experience legible. Psychologically, polarity is the engine of identity formation through repeated costly choice. Socially, polarity is the amplifier that exposes truth when systems are stressed. In all three, the danger is the same, confusing a pole with a moral crown. So the practice is not to become balanced. The practice is to become honest about your relationship to each pole. Where do you secretly idolize one direction? Where do you secretly despise one direction? Where do you pretend you are neutral while your behavior proves loyalty? If you can answer those questions without decoration, you will start hearing polarity as a living music instead of a battlefield. You will notice that the poles are not enemies, they are signals. One signal says preserve. One signal says release. One signal says move forward. One signal says wait. One signal says open. One signal says close. And even here, the teaching refuses to end cleanly. Because once you can read the signals, you still must decide. You still must accept that discernment does not remove risk. It only removes self-deception. The cost of clarity is that you can no longer pretend you did not know. So polarity tones do not give you peace. They give you precision. They do not give you a side to join. They give you the ability to choose without hatred, to refuse without cruelty, to open without self-betrayal, and to close without shame. And when you taste that precision, you will realize the next question is already waiting, quiet and unavoidable. What becomes possible when opposites stop competing and start forming rhythm? And what will it demand from you to let that rhythm rewrite your life? If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Haret library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.